So as we jump into the mechanics of initiation, so we can start to break down how we get to this place of unitive consciousness, let's, I'm going to start reading off a list of different initiations and rites. And so, you can nod, or I'll even pause a little bit in between saying different ones, and then whatever you want to say or comment about them as you are guided to, then go for it. The mechanics of initiation into the mysteries. So, rites of passage. Knowledge of creation.
That's a big one. You'll go through a lot of creation scenarios through different parts of the world. You're taken right into it. It's really cool. There is something profoundly important about touching into the energy of creation points upon the earth, because we as spiritual beings going through the initiations are becoming creators as well. So these are big blasts of creative energy that we are receiving of.
Death of the persona. Surrender of the will to the Almighty God.
That's one of the most important things we do. It's the humility that we cultivate towards the will of God that determines literally the length of the journey we will take.
And some of the specific initiations that you listed in the chapter on mechanics of initiation. The nature of time and space.
Well, that's important because you do learn to travel forward and backwards in time, but you also travel a great deal through timelessness, which is beautiful.
And the initiation into the balance of masculine and feminine in your soul. Entries into the eye of mystical knowledge, known from the Egyptians. We kind of touched upon that earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we did.
Cycles of time as retributive karma.
Retributive, yes. And that's important. That's something that we actually learn to do in the alteration period as well, in terms of creating cycles of time and putting an endpoint to cycles of time. Cycles of time are periods of time where a karma is allowed to continue to play out. And when a soul needs to come to an endpoint, there are things that are done in the spiritual realms that actually bring about an endpoint. These are initiatory, energetic things, which literally, this is where it stops. If it doesn't stop that day, then what ends up happening is the karma is no longer under as much protection. So if the person is not getting it, then they're going to experience some more of the consequences of their error, so that they will hopefully then begin to see it. But the purpose of these endpoints is to actually help souls to stop the endless circling, because that's how it's kind of referred to in the mystical spheres. Karmic circling, the endless circling of souls. They also speak of that with the chaos realms in the hell realms, the endless circling of the souls in the chaos realms. And so you want to create endpoints where they have to energetically, there's a big cutoff, and a lot of times it will stop that momentum for that soul. But if a soul is still unreceptive, then they become more susceptible to the natural consequences of their acts if they haven't already experienced them.
So it's like kind of like, come on, man.
Yeah, exactly.
You know.
Come on. It's like the
Yeah.
1058th time you've done it in the last year. Can we get this now?
Look, it was already written in the contract 1,500 times. Come on. Now, I should have started this out with, in regards to the chapter on the mechanics of initiation. What is the mechanics of initiation?
Well, these are actual initiatory passages, you know. Well, you know, like for instance, in the ancient mystery schools, the mystery rites and rituals, that some of which are still practiced today, were actually modeled on things that happened in the spiritual or in a vision that one of the seers had. And so in the initiations into the mysteries, you have different types of visions that are taking you through trials. And these trials you go through sometimes once, sometimes more than once, you know, because if you don't get through the first time, then you might have to do it again, you know, things like this. But these initiations go through a mechanical process, which is, okay, so for these particular things that you're going to take in energetically or overcome, we're going to have you go through this ritual passage. And so that happens through kind of a prescribed method. Everyone's experiences can be slightly different. They can be sometimes dramatically different, you know, but this gives people an idea of how they will manifest. So the mechanical part of it is the way that it will play out in the ethereal worlds in order to bring the soul through that initiation and pass through that gate. Because you have to pass through each gate fully before you move on to the next. That's one of the different things about the initiations. There are requirements in order to complete those tasks. So you have to complete those requirements. If you don't, you have to kind of go through it in a slightly altered way again, or, you know, things like that. So.
Okay. So let's continue on. This next one sounds really interesting.
Cool.
So hopefully you'll respond and say something about it. The initiation into the energetic exchange between planetary systems.
Oh, yes, that is, gosh, that is really, that is very cool. What it entails is that we receive of energies from different planets in our system, as well as different planets in other systems, and, you know, also stars and other galactic matter, because there are certain universal objects that contain certain types of energies that we require to move through these initiations to a higher thrust. So for instance, Saturn's rings. For some reason, it's really important that you go through the initiation into Saturn's rings. There's something energetically really important about that. Jupiter, you go to Jupiter as well, but it's a completely different energy, you know. Then there are other things like the stars, completely different energy. There are entries into the corridors of the sun, which has a specific immortal task to it. So there's a lot of these corridors that go into the sun, and that's really cool. But there are certain energetic vibrations that you're taking on, in these sojourns into these different corridors into the sun. But we're literally taking on galactic and celestial energies that we need for our own transformation as a soul.
And so, sorry.
No worries. It brings that vibration to us.
And so, is there credence to astrology in some way, or not as we practice it, or it does it? What is your take on that, or is that completely
I
different?
don't know on that one. I believe that there probably is some credence to it, just because it is so old and it was practiced by, you know, the ancient Jews as well. But I'm still kind of studying that question. I'm not quite sure. I have friends who are very, very gifted astrologers, and I don't personally put a lot of energy or time into astrology myself, so it's not my thing. But I haven't really come to a final conclusion on that, just because, you know, I know that some astronomers say that astrology was like the first astronomy, you know, and so in that regard, then we would have to recognize that that's also valid in terms of, you know, ancient science morphing into modern science and all those kinds of things. But I don't understand it enough to know how that works.
Well, some people see astrology as it's a psychological type of way of understanding humanity at large and individually within families. One astrologer is like, well, you know, they're just like, you know, rocks floating in space. And so it's like there's so many different kinds of astrologies. There's a lot of them. I mean, astrology, it's the study of the stars. But what you're saying is basically you have your own experiential astrology. It's more of like a spiritual, cosmic, celestial astrology, because Jupiter having an energy or a certain galaxy having an energy that affects us, that's like the real astrology. You should write a book about that. But yeah, so and you know, all like we have talked about in the past too, that different planets, different stars, they have a soul. They are like,
yes, they do. Yes, that's true. They do have a soul. I think I don't know enough about it to really say anything with an educated, you know, type thing. But I think the area that would be difficult for me to discern with the limited knowledge I do have right now is, you know, whether or not every single person who's born at the exact same time on the planet, you know, around the world will have the exact same characteristics personality wise. Because
well, in astrology it has to do with latitude and longitude as well.
oh, does it? Okay, well, see, that's why I said I just don't know.
But even
but
like,
I think
even twins,
you know,
that are like born, you know, a minute apart can have completely different personalities too.
right, that's a good point as well. So I'm not really I'm not really a proponent of divination in general, because I was specifically told mystically years ago to stop utilizing divination things. And I used like the I Ching and some things years ago, but I was told not to utilize those things. And so I'm obviously, for that reason, not don't put a lot of energy into anything related to divination of any kind. Yeah.
So let's continue on with different initiations here. I just thought that'd be an interesting one.
It is.
And it was. The initiation into the coming together of the past and the future.
Okay. Yeah, that is the coming together of, that's important. And you know, that one continues throughout your life, but this has a couple of different aspects to it. It has to do with your past lives, your future lives. But what people might not be thinking of is the sacred hoop, which is a Native American thing, which is the coming together of the sacred hoop, which is the beginning of your life when you're a baby to the time of your older self before your death. And I've had several experiences related to this, even since I went through the initiations like decades ago, where it was important that the current me contact the older me. And that was the completing of the sacred hoop. And these were important things necessary for the completion of destiny. And so, you know, it's interesting. One of the things about the initiations is you're going to run into things that span through many world religions. So you have your tribal religions, but you're going to see ancient Egyptian things, ancient Christian, ancient Hindu and Buddhist things, and stuff from all over, and things that are completely unrelated to any of them. And so it's it's a fascinating ride, you know.
Mm-hmm. Birth and death points in lifetimes and cycles of energy.
Well, those are also kind of related. You know, the cycles of time and the birth and death points have to do with when we are creating something new or ending something old. And these can happen, and we also work on these in the initiations to create birth and death points. So we want to create a death point, like for instance, of an old karmic program, but we also then have to re-energize a new birth point, which is going to be of the new cosmic self or whatever we're led to in the spiritual world, so that we are prepared then to move into this new ethereal construct. And the cycles of time, it's related to what we just talked about with the creating endpoints as well. These are cycles of time where either karma is allowed to play out, cycles of time which we go through for certain periods of learning. And then when we're done with this, okay, this cycle of time is about to end. So we have to create an end point, a death point, so that you can birth into the new cycle of time, which is going to be a whole new model of knowledge, you know. All of these kinds of things we're taught how to do it, and we go through it over and over in the initiations and in the mysteries, so that we can then learn to do this for ourselves throughout the remainder of our life.
And this one is related: the unification of all past, present, and future existences, our own and all of creation.
That goes back to what we were talking about just a little bit ago, where you bring into yourself the knowledge of all of your own lifetimes, and then eventually the knowledge of all life itself. And so, you know, this is the thing. I don't know that we all really think about the value of that, because, you know, most of us will go through many lifetimes where we experience sickness, health, wealth, poverty, and all manner of existence. We'll be different races. We'll be every race on earth. We'll be every culture on earth. We'll probably be in a lot of different religions, you know. We may have propensities to certain cultures that are just, you know, part of our soul configuration. But these types of experiences that we have are very valuable, because when we focus only on our current personality, we often can only see through those eyes. And so this is what is so valuable about it, that we have the ability to tap, you know, literally with the, you know, in a split second to that experience. And again, as we bring in the knowledge of all life, this is one of the ways, and you know, the ancient Buddhas taught this. This is how we generate compassion in, you know, the monks, is that we contain within ourselves the experiences of all creation. And by doing that, we become capable of seeing through many eyes. And that is how we truly generate compassion. Because again, experience it, embody it. Experience it, embody it. You know, we want to embody it. So, you know, you start off with the intellectual idea, then you experience it, but you want to bring it to embodiment. And that's what the initiations will do.
Mm-hmm. And would you say like embody it to experience it? Like real time?
Well, you can go, I mean, you can take it that way too. You can, because I mean, what you're doing is you're becoming capable of accessing it so that for a moment you can embody it to a certain extent, so you can bring forward what you need to be, you know, be able to understand to generate the compassion or generate what it is you need to understand. But when I'm speaking of embodying compassion, I'm speaking more of really embodying the concept of compassion, becoming the energy of compassion, being able to have a true, authentic compassion. You know, you talked about the first Dalai Lama, he taught this as well. And then you also have, you know, people like Mother Teresa who taught this as well, you know, in different ways. You know, the first Dalai Lama taught generating compassion by imagining and meditating on everyone being our filial person in our life. So our mother, father, sister, brother, child, you know. So every person, even our biggest enemy, we imagine that they are someone beloved by us, and it helps us to slowly generate compassion. Mother Teresa did so in her own way, with humility in a different way, where she saw Christ in every person that she served. So that was her way of generating compassion. That was her meditation. She saw Christ in every person in need. And so there are many different ways of doing this, but we want that energy to actually, you know, the particles, you want them to come within your soul and to actually activate your soul and become it. And so it's that's what I mean when I speak of the embodiment, that the particles come into you, the vibrations, the ethereal matter comes into you through these initiations, and your energy is inexorably changed by the initiation.
Right. And so rather than a utility, an ability to utilize something like
Yes,
compassion, you have actually become that, because a lot of us just want to gather tools for our toolbox.
right.
Like, okay, I can pull out that tool whenever I want, as
Yeah.
opposed to just we are that embodiment
Yes.
of that compassion, for instance.
And one of the differences, I think people would probably, I've heard people say these things when they meet certain very auspicious beings or souls, like people who've met the Dalai Lama, people who met Mother Teresa, or people who've met Pope John Paul II or Pope Francis, have told me there was a certain presence about them. You could feel it, you know? And that's what we're talking about, that they embody what they are. It's not an intellectual exercise to them. It is what they have become. They have become that which they originally sought. You see, and you know, we talked about this in the grand phases of the soul in the book, The Mysteries of the Redemption. You have to become that which you seek. And that is what we're talking about, becoming that which we seek. And these are the souls who have done this. They became it. And that's what we are attempting to do. We are seeking this out, but we are realizing that in the seeking, we actually have to become that which we seek. There isn't some other thing that is going to supply it for us. We have to become it. And you know, this is almost like that practice that people talk about, where you just do something over and over and over again until it feels natural to you. This is part of what we're doing in becoming that which we're seeking, because we are then drawing the energy of what that requires to us so that we can become it. But we start realizing that there isn't an external person or external object that will give that to us. It's something we must become. And that's part of what we missed originally. It's a transformation that actually changes who you are, who your presence is. And that's why when people are in the presence of those kinds of holy people, they can feel the Holy Spirit. They know that this person is that.
And it's not a finish line.
No.
It's a continuum.
Yes.
And it continues to go deeper and deeper, and it's a process that never stops. It's like a flowing river. If we're standing in the river, and the river is like the water is flowing past us, you know, people may think like, oh, you have enlightenment in that. You know, it's maybe like it's a momentary thing, because it's always going to be progressing, going further, going deeper, and the more we get into it, the more like beautiful it is.
Right. And you don't want it to stop. You know, that's the key, because if you allow it to stop at some point and say, okay, this is the apex, this is it, then you are no longer moving forward, you're no longer growing, and you will become stagnant. And you will again begin to feel, you know, that longing that we naturally have within us, which, you know, God has placed within us so that we would seek him. You know?
And I think a lot of us just want to reach a goal or something and go, okay, well, did that, let's go on to the next. Or a lot of us can get frustrated, you know, me included, because, you know, we're working towards something and we're like, well, you know, when do I get to the end of this? And so you know, as opposed to like, hey man, we stay at the path, that's the reward, is being on the path. And rewards, or, you know, the what comes out of it just shows up whenever it does. It's not going to be like, okay, there it is.
Yeah.
So, you know, let's move on, because we could stay with that for a while. But it's just, you know, we can't allow ourselves to just get frustrated and discontinue the journey because we don't feel like we've accomplished or fulfilled whatever we had in our mind as what the goal was. It's like, oh, this is the goal, I haven't reached it yet. Well, am I ever going to reach it? Maybe it's not within me. Maybe I don't have what it takes, you know. But
well, and you know, if you are wise, you will allow the goal to change according to what God shows you it should be. Because what we choose as a goal for ourselves will likely, often, if not always, be different than what God chooses as the goal for what we should be seeking. So if you are wise, you will seek this.
Okay. I will shoot for wise.
I try to do that too. Don't always make it there, but I try.
This is interesting, and this is right in alignment with what we just talked about, the initiation into the energetic foray into the elemental world of creation.
Oh, yes. This is where you learn about the, you know, you really go into earth, air, fire, water, ether, and you learn how these elements work. And there are guardians of these elements, and you meet them, and they teach you about the elements and how creation comes through these elements. Really, really fascinating adventure, because you are learning how you go from the basic construct of a human being to, I don't remember every part of it, but you start with the human being, you end up with a flying eagle, and then the final thing is a star. And so they're showing this morphology of the soul as the particulates evolve and transcend higher into the ether. And these are the stages that we're following. In fact, I believe there was one stage after the eagle that was the white-winged horse. So we become the Pegasus, and then we seek to become a star itself. But it was this transformative understanding of how the elements form us, and how we must understand and utilize these elements in the initiations to actually form ourselves into higher aspects of ourselves.
There's going to be an initiation into a series of passages in order to reach the ascension of the soul.
That's true. There's a whole series of those, and boy, that covers a whole bunch of ground. From some of the things relating to white buffalo calf woman, to the realm of the golden angels in the 23rd dimension. This is also where you are, in the experience that I had, it had to do with the translation of the Book of the Eights, which the Book of the Eights was something I received in the earlier initiations into the mysteries, which is the book of the immortals, the book of life, and so once your name is inscribed into the Book of the Eights, then you have to translate it. And there's this translation process which involves a whole nother series of ritual passages into understanding, what does this mean? And yes, there is.
And so there's the initiation into the ignition of the eternal flame with the soul.
Yes, that is very essential, because that happens shortly after the soul has united all of the past life elements into the one receptacle. And then there will be this balancing of the masculine and the feminine energies, which is really important, because this is a period where we are bringing together, because what we don't understand about masculine and feminine energies are that they contain within them, the aspects of creativity, logic, and different forms of the balance that we achieve. So when we bring those two together within our soul, we are creating a balance which makes possible this ignition of the eternal flame. And the eternal flame is something that has to happen before the ascension process. Those rituals can happen. So very important part of that initiation, yes.
Initiation into the rights of alteration.
Oh, very, very in-depth period, but that is all about learning about the management realm, which is where things happen before they hit the ground in the physical, and they are forming there according to our thoughts, our words, our deeds. And this is where spiritual guardians or teachers and, you know, angelic guardians and those of us called to do so can be asked to go in spiritually and make adjustments to something to change the outcome that someone might be creating for themselves, which is less than desirable, that has been deemed needs to be altered. And so there is so much to be learned on this path. You begin with learning about the ball of light that you will carry in your palms of your hands, that you will use for alterations. But you continue through, in my case, I was transformed into one of the medicine women from throughout the ages, and I was given this beautiful opportunity to meet all the medicine women from throughout the ages. And then, you know, all of this beautiful tribal drumming and the native chanting going on as you're being taken into these alterations. But this is also where you are learning how to, not just how to alter reality, but also how to begin to understand how we form our reality through not just karma, but our thoughts, words, deeds, and actions, but also from our past life karmic influx, but also from ignorance, darkness, evil. So we're really learning now about those things, and that's a big part of it. So it's a very important part of the initiations.
Initiation into returning to the natural state.
That was an interesting period. It was very important, and I can't even really say why, but I can just say that it was. It was important that I had to go through a series of ritual initiations into going from, at the time, I was much more citified. I was living in a city at that time and had really been like separated from my natural roots. It was important that I return to the natural, being comfortable with the natural world. And then as that continued, I ended up becoming much more comfortable with the natural world, ended up living in the mountains for decades. But this was important. And I think it has to do with there's something energetic about that is not good for mankind to be too separated from life as God created it, that there has to be a balance with us in the within the natural world. And this was something that I had to go through. Chief Joseph was a big part of this, and he was actually pretty funny about it. He did a lot of really kind of hilarious things to kind of make fun of me, and it was great. So, but you know, but this is something that people can actually kind of just take note of, that, you know, if this is something you see in your life, do things that you can to bring the natural world back into some kind of balance, whatever your living environment may be. Even if you are living in a city, you know, you can find ways to do that by, you know, bringing in some potted plants, you know, or doing something that you do to whatever you feel energized. You'll be told personally what works. But you'll go through some initiations if you are not connecting properly, because this is part of connecting to all of creation, is returning to what is natural, because we are a natural being too, and we forget that. We forget it, you know. And so we want to be in touch with those roots that hold us together within the the web of all life.
Yeah, and with the web, there's like a certain web of energy, bioenergy. So
Right.
we just came from Oregon. We were there for a month, and I live in Los Angeles, and the city of angels. And there's a completely different energy. We're living next to a river, and I'm from Wisconsin originally, and small town in the middle of nowhere. And so I'm used to nature. And so we're in the city and there's all these, cell phone waves and 5G and, it's just electromagnetic like it's a microwave. And
Yep.
it affects people.
Yes, it does.
So, we're considering moving to Oregon. We're going to be going back up there in about 6 weeks. Yeah, very important.
Yes,
Okay.
it is.
And, when we're in the city, we go to the park. I go with my 3-year-old like all the time. Just get out there, get in nature, play. So it's important if we live in a city, like you said, just to get out there.
Well, that's definitely a good way to do it too, because we forget about the fact that those are very prevalent. I was surprised when I was living in New Jersey for a while. I had forgotten how many beautiful parks are, nestled up in those areas, even around New York State. So, so take advantage of those things to reconnect, to the natural world if you're in those kinds of environments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's lots of good things to celebrate too from being in cities because there's so much culture and
Yeah.
Initiations into achieving equanimity. Initiation into receiving of the living water.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Isn't it?
The beauty of that is, when you receive the living water, you will literally be facing up, and the angels have a pitcher that never empties, and they just keep pouring the living water down your throat, and it never empties, and it's like living light. And it's an unbelievable feeling because of the high-powered nature of that living water. But yeah, the pitcher never empties. They just keep pouring it until they feel like, okay, she might be done.